When HOA President Karen stabbed 7-year-old Emma mid-flight with a pen, she thought she'd silenced an annoying child. But the captain who diverted the plane was Emma's father, a man who just discovered he had a daughter. Now Karen would learn that some mistakes cost everything. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The scream tore through the cabin of Flight 447 like a knife through silk. Sarah Mitchell's world shattered in the space between one heartbeat and the next. One moment, her 7-year-old daughter, Emma, was sleeping peacefully against the window, her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. The next, blood was blooming across Emma's pale blue dress, and a woman in a designer suit was standing over them, a ballpoint pen dripping red in her trembling hand. She kicked my seat. The woman hissed, her face twisted with rage. Little brat kept kicking my seat. Time stopped. Sarah's mind couldn't process what her eyes were seeing. Emma's eyes were wide with shock, her small mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. The pen had struck her shoulder, but the sight of her daughter's blood made Sarah's vision blur with tears and fury. "You stabbed my baby?" Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. Then louder, "You stabbed my child." The cabin erupted into chaos. Passengers jumped from their seats. A flight attendant came running down the aisle, but Sarah saw none of it. Her entire universe had narrowed to Emma's pale face and the spreading crimson stain. The woman, Karen Hendress, her nameplate had read when she boarded with her HOA conference materials, stepped back, suddenly realizing what she'd done. She wouldn't stop kicking. I asked her to stop. I asked nicely. She's 7 years old. Sarah's hands shook as she pressed a blanket against Emma's wound. "She's a baby. I'm president of Meadowbrook HOA, Karen said, her voice rising defensively. I have an important conference. I paid for business class. I shouldn't have to deal with a flight attendant finally reached them. Ma'am, step back now. But Karen wasn't finished. Do you know who I am? I'm on the board of 3 homeowners associations. I have connections. That child was disrupting my flight, and I demand." "You demand?" A male passenger stood up, his face red with anger. "You stabbed a little girl." Other voices joined in. The cabin filled with outrage with demands that Karen be restrained, that the plane land immediately. But Sarah heard none of it. She was focused on Emma, who had started to cry. Small, frightened whimpers that broke Sarah's heart into smaller and smaller pieces. "Mommy, it hurts," Emma sobbed. "Why did she hurt me?" "I know, baby. I know." Sarah's tears fell onto her daughter's hair. "You're going to be okay. I promise you're going to be okay." The flight attendant spoke urgently into her radio. Code red in business class. "We need the captain. Child injured. Request immediate emergency landing." Sarah barely registered the words. Her mind was spinning, drowning in helplessness and rage. They were 30,000 feet in the air. Her daughter was bleeding, and there was nothing she could do except hold her and pray. Then a voice came over the intercom. "Come," familiar in a way that made Sarah's breath catch. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." Sarah's head snapped up. That voice. She knew that voice. "We've had an incident in the cabin." The captain continued. "Emergency medical personnel will be meeting us on the ground. We're diverting to Denver International. Landing in 20 minutes. Flight attendants, prepare for emergency protocols." Couldn't be. 8 years had passed. 8 years since Sarah had walked away from the only man she'd ever loved because she was young and scared and convinced she wasn't enough. The cockpit door opened. A man in a captain's uniform stepped into the cabin, and Sarah's world tilted again. James Carter, Emma's father. The man Sarah had left behind without explanation. Too ashamed to admit her pregnancy. Too afraid he'd see her as the trap she feared she was. His eyes swept the cabin professional and assessing. Then they landed on Sarah, on Emma, on the blood. His face went white. For 3 seconds he stood frozen. Then training took over. He strode down the aisle. His jaw set, his hands steady. But Sarah saw the tremor in his shoulders. The way his eyes couldn't leave Emma's face. "Status," he said to the flight attendant. But his gaze was locked on the small girl in Sarah's arms. Penetrating wound to the shoulder. Bleeding is controlled. The child is responsive. James knelt beside them. Up close, Sarah could see the lines around his eyes, the gray threading through his dark hair. But his hands were gentle as he reached toward Emma. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said softly. "I'm Captain Carter. Can you tell me your name?" Emma's lip trembled. Emma Mitchell." Something flickered across James's face. Recognition? Calculation? His eyes met Sarah's, and in them she saw 8 years of questions, of hurt, of longing. But there was something else, too. A growing suspicion that made Sarah's throat tight. "Emma," he repeated slowly. His gaze dropped to the stuffed rabbit in her lap, to the small silver bracelet on her wrist that read Emma Rose Carter in tiny letters. The bracelet Sarah had bought in a moment of weakness, unable to completely erase James from their daughter's life. James saw it. His face went very still. "How old are you, Emma?" His voice was barely above a whisper. 7. Emma's tears had slowed, fascinated by the kind pilot despite her pain. "I'll be 8 in March." March. James's eyes closed briefly. When they opened, they were blazing with emotion Sarah couldn't name. He looked at Sarah and she saw him doing the math, putting pieces together. "Is she?" he started. "Yes," Sarah whispered, her own tears streaming. "Now she's yours." The world stopped again. James stared at Emma like she was a miracle he'd stopped believing in. His hand hovered near her face, afraid to touch, afraid she might disappear. "My daughter," he breathed. "I have a daughter." "I'm sorry," Sarah choked out. "I'm so sorry. I was scared. I thought behind them Karen Hendricks made the worst mistake of her life." "Oh, for God's sake, can we focus on the real problem here?" She'd been held in her seat by 2 passengers, but her voice still carried that same entitled edge. The child was being disruptive. She needed to be disciplined. If the mother had been doing her job, James stood slowly. The transformation was terrifying. The gentle man who'd knelt beside his daughter vanished, replaced by something cold and dangerous. "What did you say?" His voice was quiet, deadly. Karen seemed to realize her error, but pride wouldn't let her back down. "I said the child needed discipline. I'm the president of 3 HOAs. I know about maintaining order and enforcing rules. That child was kicking my seat for 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Her mother did nothing. So you stabbed a 7-year-old girl. I tapped her with a pen. If she hadn't been so dramatic." James took a step forward. 2 flight attendants moved to intercept him, but something in his eyes made them hesitate. "You stabbed my daughter." Each word was ice and fury. "My daughter who I just learned existed. My daughter who is bleeding because you decided your comfort mattered more than a child's safety." Your Karen's face went pale. "I didn't know. It wouldn't matter if she belonged to a stranger." James' hands were fists at his sides. "But she's mine and you heard her." The cabin was silent. Every passenger watched transfixed. Karen tried to rally. "I want a lawyer. You can't threaten me. I'll sue the airline. I'll sue you personally." "Do you know who I am?" James smiled. It was not a nice smile. "I know exactly who you are, Mrs. Hendricks. Karen Rise, president of Meadowbrook HOA, board member of Sunset Hills and Riverside Communities. You live at 847 Maple Drive. You have a daughter named Christine at Stanford, a son named Robert at Harvard. Your husband Paul is a corporate attorney." Karen's face went from pale to gray. "How do you?" "I'm a pilot, Mrs. Hendricks. We have systems, information, and right now every law enforcement agency between here and Denver is receiving your name, your details, and the charge. Assault with a deadly weapon against a minor. It was a pen. You used it as a weapon against a child." James leaned down, his voice dropping. "And when we land, you're going to learn that there are consequences. Real consequences. Not HOA fines or strongly worded letters. Prison, Mrs. Hendricks. You're going to prison." The 20 minutes until landing were the longest of Sarah's life. James returned to the cockpit to bring them down, but not before kneeling once more beside Emma. "I have to fly the plane now, sweetheart," he told her. "But when we land, I'm not going anywhere. I promise." "Emma." brave despite everything, managed a small smile. "You're really my daddy?" James's face crumpled. He pressed his forehead gently against hers. "Yeah, baby, I'm really your daddy. And I'm so sorry I wasn't here before." "It's okay," Emma whispered. "You're here now." Sarah watched them, her heart breaking and healing simultaneously. This moment, this meeting she'd feared and hoped for, was happening in the worst possible way. But watching James with Emma, seeing the instant love in his eyes, she knew she'd made a terrible mistake in keeping them apart. James stood, his eyes meeting Sarah's over Emma's head. There was hurt there, anger, but also something else. Understanding maybe, or at least the promise of it. "We'll talk," he said quietly. "But first, let's get her safe." The landing was smooth despite the emergency. The moment the plane stopped, EMTs rushed to board. They stabilized Emma, checked her vitals, confirmed the wound was painful, but not life-threatening. The pen had missed anything vital. "You're one lucky little girl," the lead paramedic told Emma. "Brave too." But Emma wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were on James, who had emerged from the cockpit and was pushing through the crowd to reach her. "Daddy," she called out. The word so natural it brought fresh tears to Sarah's eyes. James gathered them both in his arms, careful of Emma's injury, but desperate to hold them. "I've got you," he murmured. "Both of you. I've got you." Behind them, police officers boarded the plane. They approached Karen Hendricks with handcuffs. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon." Karen's composure finally cracked. Wait, please. It was an accident. I didn't mean to actually hurt her. I just wanted her to stop." "You stabbed a child," the officer said flatly. "Let's go." As they led her away, Karen looked back at Emma with something that might have been regret. But it was too late for regret. Too late for explanations. She'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. At the hospital, doctors confirmed Emma would be fine. Stitches, antibiotics, careful monitoring for infection. But children were resilient, they said. She'd heal. "Will I have a scar?" Emma asked, her voice small. James sat beside her bed, holding her hand like he'd never let go. "Maybe a small one. But scars are okay. They show you survived something difficult." "Will people ask about it?" "Probably." James smiled sadly. "And when they do, you can tell them you have a really cool dad who's a pilot." Emma giggled, then winced. "Don't make me laugh. It hurts." "Sorry, baby." He kissed her forehead. "Rest now. I'm right here." Sarah watched from the doorway, exhausted and emotionally wrung out. When Emma finally dozed off, James stood and joined her in the hallway. They stood in silence for a long moment. 8 years stretched between them like an ocean. "Why?" James finally asked. His voice was rough with pain. "Why didn't you tell me?" Sarah's tears returned. "I was 22. You were building your career. We'd only been together 6 months. I convinced myself you'd see the baby as a trap. That you'd resent me. That I'd be ruining your life. So you disappeared. I left a note. A stupid, cowardly note that explained nothing." Sarah covered her face with her hands. "I was so scared, James. My mom raised me alone after my dad left. I knew how hard it was. I thought if I just vanished, you could keep living your dream." "My dream?" James laughed bitterly. "Sarah, you were my dream. You vanished and I spent months looking for you. I hired investigators. I called every person we knew. You just disappeared. I moved to Oregon, changed my phone number, started over, and had our daughter alone." The words were accusing and broken. "Yes." Sarah met his eyes. "And every single day I wondered if I'd made the right choice. Every milestone, her first word, her first step, her first day of school, I thought about you. I wore your shirt when I went into labor because I wanted some part of you there. I gave her your last name as a middle name because I couldn't bear to erase you completely. But you did erase me from 7 years of her life." "I know." Sarah's voice cracked. "I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, James. I was young and stupid and scared. I robbed you of being her father. I robbed her of knowing you, and I can never make that right." James leaned against the wall, his eyes closed. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "I've dated over the years, but no one ever measured up to what we had. I kept comparing everyone to a ghost.
James, I'm angry. Sarah.
I'm so angry I can barely see straight. But I'm also terrified that if I express that anger, you'll disappear again. You'll take Emma and vanish, and I'll never find you this time. I won't run. Sarah promised. Never again. Whatever you need, time, space, therapy, lawyers, I'll do it. I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you. To both of you. I don't want revenge. James said quietly. I want my daughter. I want to know her. I want to be her father for real, not just genetically. You already are. Sarah smiled through her tears. Did you see her face when she called you daddy? She's been waiting for you her whole life. I've been waiting for you her whole life. They stood together in the sterile hospital hallway. Two people who'd loved and lost and found each other again in the worst possible way. There was so much to figure out, so many conversations to have. But for now, there was Emma. Can I stay? James asked. Tonight with her, James, you don't have to ask. She's your daughter. Is she? His eyes searched Sarah's face. Legally? Am I on her birth certificate? Sarah nodded. I might have been a coward about telling you, but I couldn't leave you off completely. Your name is there. Something in James' expression softened. Thank you for that at least. Karen Hendricks's arrest made national news. HOA president stabs child on flight ran the headlines. Social media exploded. Her HOAs removed her from all positions. Her friends abandoned her. Her lawyer fought for bail, but the judge denied it. You used a writing instrument as a weapon against a 7-year-old, the judge said during her hearing. You showed no remorse. You prioritized your comfort over a child's safety. Bail denied. Karen's trial was scheduled for 3 months away. In the meantime, she sat in a jail cell alone with her regrets. Her husband filed for divorce. Her children stopped visiting after the first week. The life she'd built, the power, the prestige, the control crumbled like sand. Emma, meanwhile, recovered quickly. Children heal fast, the doctor said. But Sarah knew it wasn't just physical healing. Emma bloomed under James's attention. He took 2 weeks off work, spending every moment getting to know his daughter. They discovered they both loved science fiction movies, strawberry ice cream, and terrible dad jokes. When Emma laughed at his puns, Sarah's heart soared and broke simultaneously. Tell me about her, James said. One night after Emma had gone to bed, they sat on Sarah's couch, careful space between them. Everything I want to know, everything. So Sarah told him about the pregnancy, the morning sickness, the fear, about labor and holding Emma for the first time and the overwhelming love that made every hardship worth it. She told him about Emma's first word, Mama, her first steps at 10 months, her obsession with butterflies, age 4, her recent fascination with astronomy, age 6. She wants to be an astronaut, Sarah said. Or a pilot like you. James' eyes filled with tears. She knows about me. I told her stories, not the truth. I'm ashamed of that. But I told her Daddy was a pilot who had to be away. That he loved her even though he couldn't be there. I couldn't bear for her to think you didn't want her. I would have wanted her, James said fiercely. I would have wanted both of you. Always. I know that now. Sarah reached for his hand hesitantly. To her relief, he let her take it. I'm sorry I didn't know it then. They sat in silence, hands linked, processing 8 years of lost time. Where do we go from here? Sarah finally asked. James looked at her. Really looked at her. I don't know. I'm still angry. I'm still hurt. But I also still love you. I've loved you for 8 years, Sarah. That doesn't just disappear. I love you too, Sarah whispered. I never stopped. Then we figure it out together this time. James squeezed her hand. I want to be in Emma's life fully. I want custody arrangements, school decisions, holidays, all of it. Yes, anything. And us. James hesitated. We need to take it slow. Get to know each other again. See if what we had is still there. It is, Sarah said. I know it is. Maybe. James smiled sadly, but we're different people now. We need time. Over the following weeks, they established a routine. James moved to Oregon, taking a position with a regional airline that allowed him to be home more. He got an apartment near Sarah's house, close enough to see Emma daily. but separate enough to maintain boundaries. They went to family therapy, working through the complicated emotions of lost time and second chances. Emma thrived. Having her father in her life filled something Sarah hadn't realized was missing. James taught her about flying, took her to air shows, helped with homework. He was patient, loving, everything Sarah knew he'd be. And slowly, carefully, Sarah and James rebuilt what they'd lost. It wasn't easy. There were arguments about the past, tears over lost time, moments when the hurt felt too big to overcome. But they persisted for Emma, for themselves, for the love that had never really died. 3 months after the incident, Karen Rise went to trial. The prosecution had an overwhelming case. Dozens of witnesses, video footage, Emma's medical records. Karen's lawyer tried to argue temporary insanity, extreme stress, diminished capacity. None of it worked. James and Sarah debated whether to attend, whether to subject Emma to the trial. In the end, they decided to go, but left Emma with Sarah's mother. She needs to know that justice happens. James said that people who hurt others face consequences. The courtroom was packed. News cameras lined the hallways. Karen looked smaller than Sarah remembered, diminished by her orange jumpsuit and the weight of her actions. When it was Sarah's turn to testify, she spoke clearly about that day on the plane, about watching her daughter get stabbed, about the blood and the fear and the helplessness. "What did the defendant say after she stabbed your daughter?" the prosecutor asked. She said Emma deserved it for kicking her seat. Sarah's voice was steady. She said she was HOA president and shouldn't have to deal with children. Gasps filled the courtroom. The jury looked horrified when James testified he was calm but intense. "My daughter, who I just learned existed, was bleeding, and the defendant showed no remorse. Only anger that her flight was disrupted." The defense attorney tried to paint Karen as a stressed professional who'd made one mistake. But on cross-examination, the prosecutor destroyed that narrative. "Mrs. Hendricks, you filed 247 complaints with your HOA against neighbors in the past 5 years. You've called the police on children playing outside. You've sued 3 families for minor infractions. Does that sound like someone who made one mistake under stress?" Karen had no answer. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing came a week later. Emma, now 8, asked to be there. Sarah and James debated, but Emma was insistent. "She hurt me," Emma said, her voice strong despite her small size. "I want to see what happens to people who hurt kids." So they went. Emma between her parents, their hands linked together. The judge was a stern woman in her 60s. She looked at Karen with no sympathy. "Mrs. Hendricks, you used your position, your privilege, and your sense of entitlement to justify violence against a child. You showed no remorse. You blamed the victim. You prioritized your comfort over a child's safety. This court finds your actions reprehensible." Karen finally began to cry. "For the crime of assault with a deadly weapon against a minor, I sentence you to 8 years in prison, followed by 5 years probation. You will also pay full restitution for all medical bills, therapy costs, and damages to the victims. You are prohibited from holding any HOA position or board membership for life, and you will complete anger management and psychological counseling." Karen crumpled in her chair. Her lawyer moved to support her, but she waved him off. 8 years, she whispered. 8 years, the same age as Emma, Sarah realized. Justice in its own way. As they left the courthouse, Emma tugged on James's hand. "Daddy, is 8 years a long time?" James knelt beside her. "Yeah, baby. It's a very long time." "Good." Emma's voice was firm because what she did was very bad. It was James agreed. "But you know what? You're okay. You're safe. And you have Mom and me, and we're never going to let anyone hurt you again." Emma threw her arms around his neck. "I love you, Daddy. I love you too, Emma." Rose. James held her tight, his eyes meeting Sarah's over their daughter's head. In his gaze, Sarah saw forgiveness. Maybe not complete. That would take time, but present, growing. 2 years later, Sarah stood in the cockpit of Flight 739, watching James work. They'd remarried 6 months ago in a small ceremony with Emma as flower girl. hadn't been easy. The road to forgiveness and rebuilding trust was long and often painful, but they'd walked it together. Emma, now 10, sat in the jump seat, wearing headphones too big for her head, grinning as her father explained the instruments. She'd flown with him dozens of times now, her dream of being a pilot growing stronger with each trip. See that, Em? That's the altimeter. Tells us how high we're flying. 30,000 feet, Emma read proudly. She'd been reading since age 4, James learned. Gifted in math and science. His daughter. Their daughter. That's right. James ruffled her hair. Smart girl. She gets it from you, Sarah said, settling into the observer's seat. And from you, James countered. Her compassion, her strength. That's all you. They'd had this argument before. It always ended the same way, with both of them agreeing. Emma was the best parts of both of them. Daddy? Emma asked suddenly. Do you ever think about that lady? The one who hurt me? James and Sarah exchanged glances. They've been honest with Emma about what happened, answering her questions as she grew old enough to understand. Sometimes James admitted why. I think about her, too. Emma's face was thoughtful. I feel sad for her. She made a really bad choice, and now she's in prison. But I also think maybe she's learning. Maybe when she gets out, she'll be nicer to kids. Sarah's heart swelled with pride. Despite everything, Emma had grown into a kind, empathetic child. The scar on her shoulder had faded to a thin line, barely visible, but there a reminder of pain, but also of survival, of family reunited, of second chances. You're a good person, Emma Rose Carter, James said softly. Better than most adults. That's because I have good parents, Emma replied matter-of-factly. Even if it took you guys a while to figure things out. Sarah and James laughed. Emma had heard the story age-appropriate version of how her parents had found each other again. She'd forgiven them both for the lost years, saying simply, "You're here now. That's what matters." As the plane soared through clear skies, Sarah thought about that terrible day 2 years ago. How trauma and violence had paradoxically brought them together. How the worst moment of their lives had led to healing they didn't know they needed. Karen Hendricks had 6 more years in prison. Sarah wondered sometimes if she'd changed, if she understood the magnitude of what she'd done, if prison had broken her entitlement or simply hardened it. But mostly Sarah didn't think about Karen at all. She thought about Emma's laughter, about James's hand in hers, about the family they'd built from broken pieces. They lost 8 years, yes, but they had a lifetime ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. James' voice came over the intercom. We're beginning our descent into Portland. Weather is clear. Temperature is perfect. Thank you for flying with us today. Emma pressed her face against the window, watching the world below grow larger. Look, Mom, you can see our house from here. Sarah moved to join her, wrapping her arms around her daughter. James's hand found Sarah's shoulder. The 3 of them connected in this small space above the world. Below them, life continued. People going to work, children playing, families healing. And high above in the thin air where earth met sky, 3 people who'd found each other against impossible odds flew toward home. Daddy, Emma asked as they descended through clouds. When I'm older and I'm a pilot like you, can we fly together? James's voice was thick with emotion. Baby, there's nothing I'd love more. And Mom can be our flight attendant. Sarah laughed. I get airsick, remember? Oh yeah, Emma giggled. Okay, you can just be our passenger. Our special passenger who we love the most. Deal, Sarah whispered, kissing her daughter's hair. The plane touched down smoothly. As passengers gathered their belongings and filed out, Emma bounded from the cockpit to hug both her parents. Best flight ever, she declared. James and Sarah looked at each other over Emma's head, sharing a smile that held 8 years of pain, 2 years of healing, and a lifetime of love still to come. Yeah, James agreed, pulling them both close. Best flight ever.